Every day in New Zealand, over 90 people sustain a brain injury. And many will live with the devastating consequences for the rest of their lives.
The actual injury often occurs because the brain has gone from moving quite quickly to suddenly being stopped. Now that might be because you fall off a horse or you're in a motor vehicle accident, for example, and you suddenly come to a grinding halt.
George Kearney and Rangi Lakimave were both passengers in cars that crashed at high speed.
It was an estimated at 100 plus on impact into a brick wall.
Like spinning around, doing these donuts, speeding as from Mount Wellington, Mount Richmond, on the motorway to the Western Springs off-ramp. That's where we hit the back of four-wheel drive.
Dr. Rosamond Hill is a neurologist who specialises in brain injuries.
Now the problem is your brain is actually quite soft and squishy, sort of a firm jelly consistency. So when you suddenly stop, the brain within the skull actually keeps moving. And so the brain actually hits up against the hard skull on the inside.
Well, I didn't die, but I stopped breathing for 30 minutes. They had to take off the top of my head, it was so badly damaged, and replace it with fat and titanium, and there was lots of brain damage, frontal and left lobes.
George suffered serious trauma to the frontal lobe of his brain, which caused severe memory loss and also affected his hearing and eyesight. Having spent months in a coma, George had to relearn all his basic physical and emotional functions.
Apparently I didn't remember my mum at the start, which is another traumatic activity.
It was happened in the morning, so I had so much traffic that a helicopter had to come for the rescue, and yes, took me out to intensive care, and then the saddest was that the police went home, you know, and then knocked on the door really hard, and yes, my mum knew that there was a police knock, and yes, that would have been the hardest thing of receiving the police at your mum's door.
Rangi's head injury was so severe that she's now facing a lifetime of disability.
So if there has been fracture to the skull, bruising, bleeding within the brain or bleeding over the surface of the brain, all of those things constitute a far more serious injury, and there's the risk that a person might not fully recover.
George's recovery was boosted by caregiver David, who helped him out several days a week.
Was really just a caring capacity and just being somebody that was a friend for him.
I had hundreds of friends before the accident, and since they know that I've got brain damage, you know what, I've got less than 10 now. And I want to make friends. I wanted to make friends, no matter how I did it.
His personality and how he communicates can be very intense with people. When you spend long enough with George, you can really start to see he's got a huge heart.
I go to the Stewart Centre, which is a place to help me become independent. It is helping me cook, helping me with social skills, which I call social studies, and just learning to do those daily activities at home.
We're here in the Stewart Centre. They're building us up to be confident in what we do, but like in steps, you know, baby steps.
The 3 guys today are cooking meatballs and rice. Part of their goals is to work on maximising independence within the home. We have chosen cooking as one of their regular activities that they do here, but throughout the thing they need a few prompts to get them to where they are and to make sure they're on track, because some things get missed and things like that, but they do pretty well with the cooking.
Severe head injuries like those suffered by Rangi and George have obvious consequences, which in Rangi's case are apparent in the way she moves and speaks. Unlike Rangi and George, Craig Ellis has no obvious physical injuries, but the effects of 3 traumas to the brain have been just as debilitating.
My first accident happened when I hit my head at the hot pools. At the time of my accident, I I was employed as a full-time graphic design teacher. After my crash, I realised that I was not going to be able to cope. As that year went along, I started feeling worse and worse, getting more fatigued, that I would just go to school, I would work, I would find it really hard. I would come home and basically then just sleep until the next day and then just get up and then go to school. The morning of the accident, it was just a normal day going to school. I started her up. I was going down Richmond Road on my way to school, going through an intersection of Lincoln Road. The guy that was sitting in the middle of the road just pulled straight across my path. I had nowhere to go. I ended up hitting the left side of his car and then projecting, flying over onto the bonnet, and bounced off and landed back on the road where I obviously hit my head, and that threw me back into the world of concussions, and that was a really hard thing to deal with. First injury to my brain happened when I contracted viral meningitis. 9 years later, I was at the hot pools where I suffered a concussion. My third trauma to my brain was from a motorbike accident on the way to work. I have had 3 insults to the brain, the meningitis and then 2 concussions following. And that's the magic number with brain injuries as well, that once you get to that number, it starts getting really quite serious.
If you get a number of concussions, a number of brain injuries in a row, you can easily be left with permanent problems.
My physical and emotional state after my motorbike accident, I was a mess. I was suffering from fatigue, lack of concentration, headaches all the time, photosensitivity, depression, information processing and memory issues. Brain injury has a real stigma about it because the injury is invisible and you actually look like you're fine. People have a hard job trying to understand that.
Craig was desperate to find a way of expressing his inner thoughts and feelings. Eventually, he turned to art.
I started painting through going to a counsellor, and this was about 7 months after my crash. I had mass fatigue, but I also had insomnia. If I hadn't been so good during the day, or if I'd slightly overdone it, then my insomnia would be worse. She knew what sort of emotional hardships I was going through. She knew I was a creative person, and she thought, right, I need some sort of outlet, and she suggested paint. My first 5 or 6 paintings were purely just for me. They were just so I could try and express what was actually happening in my life, and then I'd go and show my counsellor and talk to her. But then I started to realise, I was looking at my paintings and going, this work is so strong, like visually, and the message that it's conveying is massive. And then I thought, wow, I have actually got a tool here that I can actually try and share to other people what I'm actually going through.
Steve Devine was a professional rugby player with both the All Blacks and Auckland Blues. Totally dedicated to sport, Steve never contemplated that his success on the field would result in brain damage.
My first real bout with the head injuries was probably about 2003. We won a semi-final at Eden Park, and I had a bad head knock in that game, and I missed the final. I got stretchered off, and it was quite a nasty one. You know, rugby for me, I was always little. I was always getting knocked around. I was pretty much always injured as well. So it was, you know, that's what it was. But I really enjoyed sort of mixing them up with the bigger boys at times, and not taking a backward step was something that I prided myself on.
For Steve Devine, life was becoming a real struggle after repeated knocks to his head resulted in multiple cases of concussion.
We played Queensland in Brisbane, and we went over on a Wednesday for a Saturday game, which was a day earlier. I basically slept for 3 days prior to the game.
I found with Steve is when He would try his hardest to act really normally when we had people around or when we were out. So he'd use all his energy and he'd be happy, you know, Steve, and then they'd go and he'd just collapse on the couch.
Steve Devine took the advice of his doctors and took 6 months off rugby. But after returning in 2007, the knocks and the migraines kept on coming.
It was against Counties at Eden Park. I took a hit to the head and and that knocked me out. And I never really recovered from that. I had headaches, the week straight after, almost every day.
I think Steve probably didn't tell me about some of the symptoms that he was having with his head because he desperately wanted to play.
I think there comes a point where one could say that it is sensible to stop doing something that's resulting in a lot of injuries. So, for example, if you've had a number of injuries playing rugby, you've got to a point where your brain is now quite vulnerable to injury.
I seen a few more doctors and it was decided that, in my best interest it was best not to play rugby anymore. It was tough. You sort of, always wanted to finish rugby on a high, and it was pretty tough to do it that way.
But for Steve, the damage had been done, and simply giving up rugby wasn't going to fix things quickly.
Nothing was really helping him get better, and I could see, he was so distressed about it.
I think I've trialled dozens of different types of medication for migraines, and nothing was really working. So now I get Botox. Women use it now for cosmetic reasons, and they've noticed that those women who are using it have stopped getting migraines, and they trialled it on me. I get it here in my sort of nose and along the top of my head and in my temples, and then way up the back of my neck. I've gone from 3-4 migraines a week to none.